Hello everyone, so today we're going to cover the first part of electricity. So let's get started. So firstly, we'll discuss about electrostatics. So all surfaces, they have electrons, okay? So when two surfaces they rub together, electron transfer will take place between these two surfaces. One will lose electron and the other will gain electron. The one that loses electrons will be positively charged and the one that gains electron will be negatively charged. The properties of the charged bodies, usually whenever we have like charges, they will experience repulsion, and unlike charges, they will attract. So if you're going to have positive and positive, they will experience repulsion. Otherwise, if you have positive and negative, they will experience attraction. Now let's move on to conductors and insulators. Conductors, these are the materials that have free moving delocalized electrons, and these are usually metals. Examples of them are like copper, iron, and lead. When we discuss about insulators, they do not have free moving electrons, so that's the reason that they do not conduct heat nor electricity. And very famous examples are glass, wood, rubber, and plastic. Although that graphite is a non-metal, but it's an exception. Graphite has free moving electrons and it's a good conductor of electricity. Now, when we discuss about earthing, it's a method to remove the excess electrons. So whenever we have any negatively charged object, means that it has more electrons than the protons. So therefore, the negatively charged object will be connected to the earth, and the extra electrons will escape to the earth. This discharging process is known as earthing. Moving on to the methods of charging, we have two methods. The first one is charging by rubbing, and the second one is charging by contact. Charging by rubbing, when the polythene rod or the perspex rod is rubbed with a dry cloth, so electrons will be transferred from the rod to the cloth or vice versa. For example, in this one, we have an uncharged cloth and uncharged plastic rod. What happened here is that the rod became positively charged and the cloth became negatively charged. So what's the reason? Actually, the positively charged rod have lost electrons and have been transferred to the cloth, and therefore this caused more electrons to be in the cloth, and now the cloth is negatively charged. Now, when we discuss about the charging by contact, is that when a charged body touches an uncharged object, the two bodies, they will share the charge. The positively charged rod caused the uncharged sphere to become positively charged too, and this is all by charging by contact. Now, to calculate the quantity of charge, we're going to use the formula of Q equals to NE. Q stands for the quantity of charge, and usually the unit of the charge is coulombs, and it's going to be represented by the letter C. N stands for the number of electrons, and E stands for the charge of one electron. Now moving on to the definitions that you need to know, we have the electric field and electric field direction. Electric field, it's the region around the charge where it experiences force on other charges. This is exactly what an electric field looks like. So around this positive charge, we have an electric field. Okay, and whenever we want to discuss about the electric field direction, it's the direction of the force on a positive charge. The electric field always moves from the positive charged plate to the negatively charged plate. So these are the field lines that are out from the positive charge and they go into a negative charge. When the lines are close to each other, means that the field is stronger. So for example, if we have in this area, the lines are kind of closer, okay, means that the field here is pretty strong compared to here. And what's the reason is that the lines are closer to each other. Now we have different electric fields that you need to know. For example, the first one is the electric field of a positive charge. Always remember that the electric field of positive charge is going to be outwards. Now, when we discuss about the electric field between the two parallel oppositely charged plates is going to be from the positive plate to the negative plate. And the electric field of a negative point charge is going to be inwards. Now discussing about the electric force, any moving charge will be affected by any electric field. For example, have a look at this. We have a positive charge moving in between two electric plates that are charged, both of them. This charge will experience a force, and therefore, since it's positive, it's going to be attracted towards the negatively charged plate. So it's going to move downwards towards it. But otherwise, if we had a negative charge, then what will happen to this negative charge is that it's going to be attracted upwards instead of downwards. What's the reason? Is that because we know that like charges attract and unlike charges repel. Now moving on into the electric quantities. The first thing we're going to discuss about is the voltage. We have two kinds of voltage that you need to know, the electromotive force and the potential difference. Electromotive force describes the voltage of the battery or the voltage of the source. And the potential difference is the voltage of any component around the circuit. It can be the voltage of a resistor, the voltage of the lamp, for example. So the electromotive force is the work done by the battery to drive the coulomb through the whole circuit. And the potential difference, it's the work done by each charge passing through a component. The formula that you need to know for the voltage is that V equals to E over Q. V stands for voltage, and voltage is measured in volts, which is represented by the letter V. E represents energy, which is represented by the letter J, which represents joules. And Q is charge, which is represented by C, which stands for coulombs. Now, you must also remember that the unit of voltage is volts. 1 volt equals to 1 joule divided by 1 coulomb. Voltage is measured using a voltmeter, and voltmeters are always connected in parallel. For example, if you have a look at this, we have a lamp. If you want to measure the voltage of the lamp, you're going to connect the voltmeter parallel to the lamp. Never connect the voltmeter in series. Now we're going to discuss about the voltage in series and voltage in parallel. Voltage in series is always sum, and the voltage is not equally divided between the components because voltage depends on the resistance. Voltage and resistance are directly proportional when current is constant. Now discussing about the voltage in parallel, voltage is equal in all of the components. The total voltage of the battery equals the total voltage of each component. Let's have a look at our example. For example, in this series circuit, the total voltage of the battery is 12 volts. But look what happened to it. It got divided unequally. Here 5 volts and here 7 volts because this all depends on the resistance of the resistors. Now in this parallel circuit, we have 8 volts. This is the total voltage. But this total voltage will be distributed the same among those both resistors because the voltage will never change. Moving on into the current intensity. Current, which is represented by the letter I, it's the amount of charge in coulombs passing the battery in 1 second. For example, this is the formula which is used to represent current. I equals to Q over T, which is the current, and it's always measured in amperes, and it's represented by the letter A. Q is the charge, and charge is measured in coulombs, which is represented by the letter C. And T, which is the time, and the standard unit of time is seconds, which is represented by the letter S. Now, note that the unit used to measure the current intensity is amperes, and always remember that 1 amps equals to 1 coulomb per 1 second. Current is measured using a meter, and the ammeter is always connected in series. Now, you can compare the difference between the voltmeter and the ammeter. Ammeter is always in series, but voltmeter is always in parallel. Keep note of that. So, have a look at this. Ammeter will always be connected in series to the component, but voltmeter will always be connected in parallel. Now discussing the difference between the current in series and the current in parallel. Current in series will always be the same throughout the circuit, but the current in parallel, the total current is the sum in the parallel circuit. Current is divided between the components. Have a look at this. Whenever we are having a series circuit, the current will be the same throughout the circuit, whether it's at the beginning, whether it's in the middle, or at the end. But in parallel circuit, we're going to have the total current is going to be the sum of the current throughout the branches. So if you have your 18 amps, it's going to be distributed among these 3 branches equally or unequally depending on the resistance in each branch. So the sum of the current into the junction is the same as the sum of the current out of the junction. So into the junction, which is 18 amps, 18 amps have been distributed across these 3 branches. So what will happen is that IS equals to I1 plus I2 plus I3. There is resistance due to the collisions between the moving electrons and the vibrating atoms in the metal. And the unit of resistance is ohm, which is represented by this symbol. The formula is V equals to RI. V stands for voltage and is going to be represented by the letter V, which is volts. I, it's the current, which is represented by the letter A and stands for amperes. And R is the resistance, which is represented by this symbol, which is called as ohms. Resistance in series and in parallel circuit. Resistance in series is always going to be sum. Series connection will increase the resistance, but otherwise resistance in parallel, this is the rule that we're going to use. R equals to R1 times R2 divided by R1 plus R2. And in parallel connection, the resistance decreases. So let's have a look here. For example, if we have here 18 ohm, it's going to be distributed. It can be either equally or unequally. And here we're going to have 6 ohm and 12 ohm. Once you add them, we're going to get the total again back, which is 18 ohm. But in parallel connection, here we have 6 and 12. If we did the calculation of R1 times R2 divided by R1 plus R2, which is 6 times 12, divided by 6 plus 12, I'm going to receive 4 ohm. And if you realize that the total resistance in series circuit is 18 ohm, but in parallel circuit is 4 ohm. And this is an evidence to prove that in parallel circuit, the resistance decreases, but in series circuit, the resistance increases. Now moving on to the resistance of wire. The resistance of wire is affected by its length, cross-sectional area, and diameter. Here, the resistance depends on the type of the wire. Different wires will have different resistance. The resistance is directly proportional to the length of the wire. For example, if the length doubles, then the resistance will also double. But when we talk about the cross-sectional area, resistance is inversely proportional to the cross-sectional area. So if area doubles, resistance will halve. And resistance is inversely proportional to the square of the diameter. So if diameter doubles, then resistance will quarter. Let's have a look. If diameter doubles, then resistance will quarter. The formula that is used to calculate the resistivity of any wire, R equals resistivity length over A. So this symbol represents resistivity, which is ohm meter. Then R is the resistance, which is represented by the symbol. L is the length, which is represented by meters. And A is the area, which is represented by meter square. Power is the amount of energy consumed or produced in 1 second. And the formula which is used to represent power is P equals to VI. P is the power, and the unit of power is watt. V is the voltage, and its unit is volts, which is represented by the letter V. And I is the current, which is represented by amperes, the letter A. Other formulas is P equals to VI, which equals to I square R, which equals to V square over R. These are all very important. Now discussing about the electric energy. The formula of electric energy is E equals to VIT. E is the electric energy, which is represented by joules. I is the current intensity, which is represented by amps. And V is the voltage, is represented by volt. The nature of electricity. Electricity is the flow of electrons from the negative to positive. You must remember that electrons and the conventional current, they do not flow in the same direction. Electrons, they flow from the negative pole of the battery to the positive pole of the battery, but the direction of the conventional current, it flows from the positive to the negative. Current can cause heating and lightning effect. It can cause magnetic effect as it causes a magnetic field around the wire, and a chemical effect, which is electrolysis. For example, heating and lightning effect is when you see a bulb. The bulb, basically, you can receive both light energy and heat energy. Here we have the magnetic effect. If you have a current moving throughout a wire, it will experience a magnetic field. And here we have the chemical effect, which is happening in an electrolytic cell. Now discussing the difference between AC and DC. DC is the direct current, and direct current means that it flows in one direction only. It flows from the positive terminal of the battery to the negative terminal of the battery, and it's produced by cells and batteries only. But the alternating current, it flows in both directions and is produced by AC generators. If you have a look here, this is the graph which is used to represent an AC current, and this is the graph which is used to represent a DC current. And here, the alternating current flows in both directions. It doesn't have a fixed direction, but the direct current flows only from positive to negative. And here we have the variable resistor. Variable resistor, it changes the resistance to control the current. And this is the symbol that we use to represent the variable resistor. When the resistance decreases, the current increases, and when the resistance increases, the current decreases. This is a rule that we need to remember, and this shows us that resistance and current are inversely proportional. There are some electric symbols that you need to memorize. Getting started, we have a cell, and this is a battery. Here we have a power supply. This is the DC power supply, the AC power supply. Here we have a fixed resistor, and this is the variable resistor, which is used to control the amount of current. Here we have the thermistor, and we're going to discuss it further down. The thermistor is related to the temperature. Light-dependent resistor, it discusses the relationship between the light and the resistance. Here we have a heater. Here we have a potential divider, which divides the voltage between components. Here we have a transformer. We're going to discuss this also further in our upcoming chapters. Here we have a magnetizing coil. Here we have, this is a switch, an earth or a ground, a junction. Here we have a lamp. Here is a motor. Here is a generator. Then we have a meter, voltmeter, diode. Then we have light emitting diode, fuse, relay, and the electric bell. So these are really important to memorize, and tips on how to memorize them, you can draw them several times using pen and paper, or you can stick the paper in a place to see them daily, and this will stick better. Now discussing about Ohm's law, V equals to Ri. V stands for the voltage, which is represented by the letter V, volts. I represents current, and its unit is amperes. R, it represents the resistance, and its symbol is ohms. The lines that are closer to the voltage axis will have higher resistance. For example, this line, the blue line, will have a higher resistance compared to the red line because this blue line is closer to the voltage axis. Ohm's law states that the current is directly proportional to the voltage at a constant temperature. Resistors that follow Ohm's law, they are called as ohmic resistors. Here we have Ohm's law and filament bulbs. As this slope decreases, this means that the resistance is increasing. And as the current increases, the filament heats up, causing more vibrations, so the resistance increases. When the line curves near the voltage axis, means that the resistance increases. So here, this one will have a lower resistance compared to this one, which will have a higher one. Other graphs that you need to know, for example, here we have metal. Metal, it's an ohmic resistor, so that's the reason it's directly proportional, the voltage and the current, at a constant temperature. The diode, this is how we're going to represent the diode, and the filament lamp, this is the graph of the filament lamp. Moving on into home installation, the electricity in houses. Electricity is supplied to our homes through cables that mainly contains 3 wires. We have the live wire, the neutral wire, and the earth wire. If the current increases, fuse can be used. Fuse is an electrical component which is connected to the live wire. So the fuse, actually, it consists of a thin metal wire, which is mainly made up of tin, that melts when the current increases. The fuse value must be close and just above the maximum current used by the appliance. Current of the appliance is 8 amps. Then the recommended fuse to be used, it would be 10 amps or 9 amps. Now here, if the live wire touches the metal casing, this will cause the casing to be also live. and therefore this can increase the risk of getting electric shocks. But we have the earth wire, and the earth wire is connected so that if the live wire touches the casing, this will allow the current to flow from the live wire to the earth wire, and after that to the earth. Earth wire, it has a lower resistance, and therefore this will allow large amounts of current to flow through it. And since the live wire is fused, means that the live wire, it contains fuse. The large amount of current will cause the fuse to heat up and to blow, and therefore this will cut down the circuit from the main supply and will block the current from moving. Now we have trip switches. They're very similar to fuses, but trip switches, it uses the magnetic effect, and fuses uses the heating effect. And there is no need for the trip switch to be replaced, but the fuses, they need to be replaced because the fuses, they blow, or basically the thin wire inside the fuse will melt, so therefore it needs to be replaced with a new one. And this is an example of a trip switch, and this is a fuse. As you can see, the small tin wire inside the fuse, it melts, and this will cut the circuit. Now moving on to double insulation. We have appliances that have double insulation. We use a 2-wire flex, and there is no need for an earth wire. Some appliances also use plastic casings instead of metal to reduce the electric shocks. Double insulation involves insulated live parts and insulated plastic casing. Now, why is it better to connect appliances in parallel rather than series? The reason here is that when the appliances is connected in parallel, they get the same voltage. And we did mention this upward, that basically the voltage is the same all throughout the circuit, in parallel circuit I mean. So we're going to get the same voltage as the main, but in series the voltage is divided. Allows each appliance to operate independently. In parallel circuit, each appliance will be able to operate independently and each one will have their own switch. But in series, all appliances, they will operate together. And each appliance will operate at its normal and full power. Of course, since they have the same voltage, it means that they will have the same power and they will operate in their real power. For example, if the power is 48 watt, they will operate at 48 watt. And it's not going to be lower or higher. But in series, the power used by each appliance is less than its normal operating value. Dangers of electricity. Of course, damaged insulation can lead to electric shocks. High current will cause the overheating of wires, which can lead to fire. And electric damp conditions will reduce the resistance of insulators, causing them to conduct, and therefore this can also lead to electric shocks. Now moving on to the costs of electricity. We can calculate the amount of energy transferred electrically in joules. But it's more convenient to use kilowatt hour. 1 kilowatt, from its name, kilo stands for 1000. So 1 kilowatt stands for 1000 watt. And 1 hour represents 3600 seconds. So 1 kilowatt hour, it's going to be 3600 seconds multiplied by 1000 watt to give us 3.6 times 10 to the power of 6 joules. 1 kilowatt hour is sometimes called as a unit of electricity. Now finally, we have the circuit components. We have diode and DC. Diode is a circuit component that allows the passage of the current in one direction only. So diode only allows the current to flow in one direction, from positive to negative. When the diode is connected in forward direction, it has low resistance. But when it's connected in backward direction, it has a very high resistance. And this is also another reason that causes the current to be blocked and not to move further. When it's connected in backward direction, we call it as the reverse bias. And when it's connected in the forward direction, we call it as the forward bias. Now here in forward bias, when the voltage increases, the current will also increase, and therefore the lamp will become brighter. But in reverse bias, which is the backward bias, as voltage increases, current will always be zero, and no current will flow. And as I've mentioned from before, that in backward bias or in reverse bias, it has a very high resistance, and this is what causes the current to be blocked. If you have a look at this example, we've mentioned that current moves from the positive terminal of the battery to the negative terminal of the battery. So here, since it's connected in forward bias, the current will be able to flow. The voltage increases, then the current will increase too. But here, if you had a look at this one, from positive to negative terminal of the battery, it's being blocked. And this is another reason that helps me to memorize it quite easily, is that the diode, as if it has something, a barrier in front of it. So I will take this as a representation of a dam. So if the current wants to flow, it will be blocked. Why? Since the dam is facing it. So therefore, the current won't be able to pass. And therefore, the resistance of the diode here is going to be very high, and this is another reason that would cause the current to be blocked and not to pass through it. And therefore, the current will forever be zero in this case. Now moving on to diode and AC. When diode is added to an AC circuit, it allows only one direction of current, and it blocks the opposite direction. The circuit that changes from AC to DC is known as rectification. That's why the diode which is used in this circuit is also known as a rectifier diode. So before rectification, this is a normal AC circuit, and we know that AC, since it flows in both directions, so of course we're going to experience part positive, part negative, the other will be positive and the other will be negative. But after rectification, it only flows in one direction. So if it flows in one direction, it will be blocked by the other, then flows in one direction, and then blocked again, and then flows back. Now, moving on to thermistor. For any conductor, if the temperature increases, the resistance will also increase. This is the normal principle. But for thermistor, as temperature increases, its resistance decreases. So for thermistor, as we increase the temperature, the resistance will decrease, and vice versa will also be true. As the temperature decreases, resistance increases. So make sure to take note of that. And this is the symbol of thermistor. Whenever we want to draw a thermistor, this is how we will draw it. And this is the graph that represents the relationship between the resistance and the temperature. Now the LDR, which is the light dependent resistor. And this is the electrical symbol for the light-dependent resistor. It's a normal resistor, and just with two arrows in the side to represent the light. And this is the LDR. From its name, light-dependent resistor. So of course, it's going to depend on the light intensity. As the light intensity increases, its resistance decreases. And this is the graph which is used to represent this. Thank you so much guys for watching this video. Wishing you all the best, and I'll be uploading this notes in an attachment in my description, so make sure to check it out. Thank you.